Hi, I'm John McNelley, a technologist with Ingram Micro, and along with me today I've got Ryan Clarkson, Jon Busshart, and Blake Maras, also technologists with Ingram Micro. Today we're going to be talking about the future of hyper-converged infrastructure, but first let's get a snapshot of HCI solutions overall. According to you guys, what are the basics around this technology?
So when I look at hyper-converged infrastructure, I think one of the main components with it is a software-defined storage entity, and basically what that means is we take local storage amongst multiple systems and we group them together as a single entity in a redundant fashion, and we present that back to our virtualized environment, something like VMware or something like that. And I say at a core, that's what we see within hyper-converged environments, but other people have other value adds that they add on into those type of environments. I would also see a quick deployment time of solutions that are out there. Usually once you get these things racked and stacked, they're deployed in less than an hour and expanded in less than an hour. Now, there's some things that are built off vSAN that kind of have a roll your own type of mentality that might take a little bit longer. But at its core, that's what I kind of expect out of hyperconverged.
That's a great overview. It sounds like kind of at the base of it all, you're kind of collapsing that three-tier architecture down into a more manageable, easy to deploy, flexible infrastructure.
Yeah, I would say I would agree with that 100%. Instead of having, discrete components for storage and servers and things like that, you have an appliance type of entity.
I
Yeah.
like to I like to add by saying that it's almost like history's repeating itself here. Prior to virtualization, there was a rack server, right, with RAID arrays. We went to this SAN architecture with blade servers, etc. And now we're moving back to the rack server, but we're just treating the storage differently. More like a SAN that we're used to in that traditional converged architecture.
Right. And it's allowing companies to become more agile too and more flexible with how they deploy their systems, kind of like that easy button that we always want and talk about.
That was great feedback, guys. Thank you. So when working with end users, what do you find are the right questions to ask that will help uncover hyper-converged opportunities?
So that's a great question. When I'm talking to customers or partners, I'm usually, if I hear things like a journey to the cloud or someone wants to develop a hybrid cloud or a cloud type of solution, HCI is a great first step towards achieving those goals for the customer. What do you guys think?
I think somebody who's moving in and out of the cloud, it makes a lot of sense. So if they had applications on the cloud and they want to bring it back on-prem, hyperconverged usually fits in pretty well there.
Yeah, and typically some other opportunities to uncover when working with end users, anything that involves simplification or like modern data centers are doing more with less. So trying to shrink the footprint down and simplifying your architecture is key to that's definitely spells hyper-converged to me when they're doing that. Rather than having a big clunky SAN, you're going to just a bunch of rack servers, and you often can go down to just a few hyper-converged appliances and really shrink your data center down. And essentially any storage refresh, any server upgrade, that's an opportunity to get in there. And, I always a big proponent of assessments to really get in there to uncover other opportunities. So anytime you get an opportunity to look at storage or even the compute is could turn into a potential.
Yeah, I suppose anytime you heard anybody kind of sing woes about not having enough IT staff to be able to manage the equipment they have, or trying to keep up pace with the security patches that are out there, that's probably a good time to start talking about hyperconverged solutions. Another thing I see a lot of is hyperconverged has really exploded within the VDI market, especially with the things that have kind of happened over the last year. A lot of people have been moving to this remote workforce and are looking for ways to be able to secure that type of environment. And hyperconverged, is a great way to build that type of infrastructure with, in a simplified way that can expand and grow as they add more users into that environment. And we've kind of let the Kraken out, right? So users have went home. They don't necessarily, or they're not all necessarily coming back into the office. So those solutions aren't going away because we're getting better. They're going to be coming more to the forefront.
It's a great way to kind of segment that VDI architecture out from, say, like the production data center too. And, as well as it fits into robo type scenarios, right, where we have just a remote branch office kind of out in the middle of nowhere, right, and we don't really want to dump resources into putting a whole traditional converged, SAN server architecture in such a tiny office.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody who needs to develop kind of like a mini data center in a quick fashion without running cables and stringing things around, right? That makes sense. So departmental resources sometimes make sense with hyperconverge as well.
Speaking of applications too, when someone's launching a new application too, and they don't necessarily know what it's going to look like 3 years down the road, HCI is a great solution with the scalability because of it. Makes it a lot nicer to be able to start small and grow if they're not really sure where that application is going to lead to down the road.
Yeah, I find hyperconverged is more scale out friendly as well as scale up. But traditional SAN architecture has always been very linear, scale up, controller, add a bunch of disk shells, that type of deal, which certainly still has its place. But hyperconverged technologies offers more of that scale out approach, and where you can even expand your compute at the same time along with your storage. So
yeah, it's a very interesting point. It seems as though both monolithic applications are now being leveraged through hyperconverged infrastructure, but also more of the agile development roadmap is going into a hyperconverged play as well. So the ability to add more resources quickly and easily, and like you said, scale up or out, whatever you need, is really lending itself to application development life cycles. Kind of in that same thread, how are hyperconverged solutions evolving right now?
So certainly when we think about hyperconverged, certainly we've got software-defined storage, we got servers, but people are looking at incorporating other pieces kind of to enhance hyperconverged technologies. Like sometimes software-defined storage can have a limiting factor as far as performance is concerned. Not all the times, but people may be looking at external storage kind of to augment that, but still given that wrapper of easy and quick deployment and expansion. I've seen vendors add switching into their infrastructure and provide some value add around that. And there was even talk around looking at the way we kind of do the virtualization later. Maybe does it need to be more containerized or something like that?
Yeah, I see a lot of folks now, taking on that challenge and adding things like shared storage environments with its designated storage for their hyperconverged environment. So adding just the storage piece of it, that's high performance storage. On the same term, I also see them adding more compute to it, where you're adding compute only nodes to kind of enhance those new applications that need a lot of horsepower behind them.
Yeah, and we're seeing just different workloads, right? You mentioned containerized apps. So like, for example, a lot of people are modernizing applications. The nature of the workloads has changed, right? Containers are a lot more agile and, aren't necessarily as clunky as a VM. So you're kind of seeing, Kubernetes being baked into, things like vSphere with Tanzu and different architectures like that.
And Cloud Foundations, right?
Yep, vCloud Foundations, right? So vCloud Foundations is kind of adding more to the mix. You have vSphere for your compute. vSAN is kind of the HCI piece, right? The storage aspect of it. And then NSX, which is a network virtualization layer, which is essential to larger container environments. So
absolutely. So I think the overall messaging is we're going to be seeing hyperconverged environments, embrace cloud-like philosophy, across the board without limiting performance or some of the other value adds that have been added.
Well, how do we think HCI is impacting cloud as a data center technology?
Sure. I think a lot of people, there was this mass migration to move applications in the cloud. But I think they realized that not all applications necessarily make sense in the cloud. And we're starting to see people start to move things back. But they've had a taste of what the cloud has to offer as far as the simple button, we'll say, for a lack of a better term. And they want more of that as an on-prem environment. So that's really, introducing the growth of this hybrid IT style environment. And certainly hyperconverged has a big play in a lot of that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I'd say that a lot of customers, what they're looking for is they're looking for a way to manage their applications and workloads that are in the cloud or on premise, in a very consistent manner, and how we're going to move those back and forth as needed between on-premise and cloud type of environments.
Yeah, I'd have to say the same. I mean, even with things like containers, we're seeing things run across distributed systems. we're seeing, workloads more on the edge, which Hyper-Converged certainly has a play there. So,
Yeah, being able to move, applications in and out of the cloud is kind of the future to a lot of things, and a lot of the virtualization stacks are facilitating that ability, and that's the sweet spot for hyperconverged is virtualization stacks.
Very much so. It seems like there's been some even concerns around cost and how to allocate cost, because there's ways that you can look at cloud environments versus on-prem, and sometimes what penciled out 2 years ago may have grown with unintended consequences. So there's
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You look at the cost model of the cloud and the way people are paying for the cloud, this kind of pay as you go and what you use. All the vendors are starting to come out with on-prem hardware that you can pay as you go type of service capability. So that's another aspect, and those are certainly getting layered onto Hyperconverged as well.
So what would you say are some common concerns that you hear from end users around HCI?
So typically some of the main concerns that I run into, obviously it varies, challenge to challenge, but usually the number one concern, especially for partners or customers who have dealt with traditional SANs and converged architecture, is usually geared around performance. Can my hyper-converged platform, or this hyper-converged platform I'm looking at, handle the enterprise workloads that I traditionally run on a SAN that can scream all day and typically, have good performance? And obviously that varies solution to solution, or, again, that comes down to right sizing and assessment and what type of workload you're running, which, again, is important to get some consulting, a consultant involved, or partner with someone. But the answer is, the majority of the time, yes. Is that always the answer? No, right? Like I said earlier, converged solutions certainly still have their place, but certainly hyper-converged has definitely matured to a point where I think you can handle a lot of enterprise workloads and still get great performance. And I tend to run into this, especially with SQL databases. So that's kind of where I see where the performance can.
Yeah, you get that person who's trying to run that screaming Oracle or SQL database, on Hyper, and you'll find white papers and stuff that'll say, kind of say this, but they'll find that they'll struggle with the performance on that, because usually the hero numbers is an aggregate of VMs that are running across hosts that are out there, and not, and to Blake's point, really you can get most of the performance that you would need inside an environment out of a software-defined platform, but those applications, and those tend to be the most business critical applications that are out there. But again, some vendors are out there are looking at that and looking at different ways to be able to come back at that. NVMe is one of the ways that software-defined storage is looking at that to be able to enhance that performance capabilities. But in the end, all your bits across your storage are going across the network. So that tends to be a limiting factor.
So one of the things that I find a lot in conversations around HCI is people are concerned with cost, right? So upfront, when you're looking at an HCI solution, typically it's going to be upfront pricing is going to be more expensive compared to a similar system where you're doing server network storage. It's going to be a little bit more expensive on the upfront pricing when you're getting a quote for it. But what we really should be looking at is kind of long-term cost of ownership. The amount of money customer is going to save for future upgrades and maintenance and management, because you're going to be combining a lot of the admin technologies with server and the storage combined into one. A lot of times the VMware, the virtualization person can run the entire system. And then the OpEx versus CapEx type of breakdown. It makes a lot more sense over time for an HCI solution. It's that upfront price, which I think concerns some people.
Yeah, if you're having a CapEx discussion with your customer about their HCI solution, you're going to lose that deal if you don't bring in the CapEx piece of it, over and over again. I see that's a mistake that resellers commonly do that out there.
Yeah, and it definitely dovetails into a data center modernization practice, right? Because some of that cost savings really can be shifted off to other projects. It's not necessarily reduction in human capital, but additions in other areas within the organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, how many times do we see this, especially with traditional storage, right? You have to have a dedicated storage guy that knows that particular vendor, get a little bit of vendor lock in there. that knows that particular system real well. Hyper-converged can certainly alleviate that, which can bring on some cost savings and kind of more of a horizontal approach to your team.
What are the ways that a partner can build or enhance their practice around hyper-converged technologies?
Well, first of all, I would say identifying the opportunity is key, which a great way to get in there is with assessments, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you can walk around the data center and stare at shiny boxes full of lights, but I mean, you need to get into the system, know what their workloads are, assess, and that can help you build a pipeline with and do account planning with your end customer and identify other projects. I mean, so getting in there, being able to get an idea of the workload, what are their storage needs, what type of performance do they need, talking to the different departments, really can help you identify the opportunity if there's a place for the hyper-converged platform. And then more importantly is building expertise and building the competencies around a HCI solution and being able to, have a good value story to tell your customer. And, once you deliver the assessment, you're going to identify other projects in there too. And that can really help build out a pipeline for, year, 2 years, 3 years with the same customer. So I think that's key to building the practice and more importantly, partnering with someone who has expertise in that, leveraging Ingram Micro as a distributor, as well as the vendors that we carry.
Yeah, and certainly Ingram Micro could help with virtualization assessments. We do have that service that is available. So certainly, I would say resellers could tune their staff. Whoever's doing your virtualization deployments, they need to start thinking about hyperconverged as to kind of level up their capabilities in their environment. That'll help considerably as far as that's concerned. And going back to the assessments, I see a lot of resellers offer the assessments as a fee service, and then if an opportunity kind of arises from that, they'll waive the fee because there's obviously more money to be made. And again, to Blake's point, you can get in there with just a hyper-converged infrastructure and then learn so much more about their environment and gain an understanding. And like we had mentioned earlier, not like everything goes to the cloud. Not everything goes to hyper-converged either. Hyper-converged has its place to fit within a data center, and helping end users understand that it's going to be a big place for our resellers.
And I would say playing off the assessment piece, right? Learning how to read the assessments and kind of understanding the data that you're getting back. Identifying those workloads that are good fits for HCI and good fits for maybe more traditional type of environments. And maybe, having those conversations with the customer if we want to separate those out or if we want to kind of bundle them all into that HCI. Just, options are good for customers. So
yeah, I would piggyback. How many times have you sized or resellers probably have gotten the RV tools readout from their customer's environment? And that's just like a snapshot in time. That doesn't tell you much of anything beyond what exists today, but you can't see the peaks and valleys of what's happening out to make sure you size things accurately for your customer's environment.
Excellent. So where do you see hyperconverged technologies going in the next few years?
So I see, as you had mentioned, I see additional services being layered on inside the environment. Certainly NVMe is going to have a big play inside the infrastructure. Looking for additional value adds from different vendors in the environment. Again, the switching and the storage that we kind of talked. I picture that as a part of the future of hyperconverged style solutions.
Yeah, I would say that, for the future, I think we're going to see better integration with hyperscalers, better integration with, how those workloads are managed entirely throughout the entire ecosystem, whether that's fully in the cloud or on premise and moving those back and forth and just moving on from there, and better application integration as well, if that's containers or other forms of application development.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Ryan as well. Is you're just going to see tighter integration with everything being software, everything these days, software, defined. Naturally, it's easy to integrate more than having, separate hardware barriers to deal with. So with workloads changing, you see Kubernetes adopted more. I think you're going to see just tighter integration with HCI solutions with, Kubernetes and virtual workloads even more so.
Yeah, I completely agree. Anything around automating the processes within the data center is going to be huge in the next few years. That's where everybody's heading. Well, great. We appreciate everyone's time today, and thank you for listening in on what we had to say about HCI. And if you'd like some more information, you can find us at www.ingrammicro.com. Thank you.